Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin with the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
Doing great. How about you, Eric?
Doing fantastic. We've had an unseasonably warm winter here in the Northeast, and I'm hoping it continues that way.
Right now, it looks like it is. I mean, we have had a little precipitation this month, but it's mostly been rain. So we've had some pretty substantial snowfalls in the past in February. But here we are. It's February 10th, and we've only had that one major one on December 1st.
It can rain all at once. I'm fine with rain because I don't have to shovel rain. So today we're going to head back to the Success Showcase bookshelf and pull out an old favorite because it's something that's worth reviewing. And we come back to it fairly often in conversations of other topics. And this is really the book that started all other self-help books. And it's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Yeah, it is one of my all-time favorites, and it is exactly what it's all about. And the bottom line is what we're about to discuss right now. All these different things are ways that you can choose to react, to respond to your reactions and how to handle people. And if people just printed these principles out and practiced them, this whole world would be a whole much better place. The book itself is divided up into four different parts. Part one is fundamental techniques in handling people. Part two is 6 ways to make people like you. Part three is winning people to your way of thinking. And part four are leadership techniques. And basically, the way the book is laid out is there are short chapters for each one. And there's 3 points in part one, six in part two, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very easy to follow and print out the summaries. If you go online, you can probably just print out a summary of all these techniques that we're going to talk about today, too. So, going to be enjoying talking about this. And the first one is fundamental techniques in handling people. And starting right off the bat, technique number one is don't criticize, condemn, or complain. And there's a little caption there. If you want to gather honey, don't kick people over the beehive.
And this is something we talk about quite frequently. It's about that positive mindset. You need to apply it to other people. People tend to want to criticize, but nobody wants to hear criticism. Now, criticism in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing if it's constructive. But when it's off the top of the head, it rarely is.
Yeah, and winning friends and influencing people, the bottom line is whenever you charge somebody with a criticism or something like that, the defense mechanism automatically goes up, even if the person thinks that you're right. It's just human nature.
Exactly. You don't want to hit people's triggers.
Yeah.
So when you focus on what they're doing right rather than what they're doing wrong, it's a much better approach. The person you're talking to appreciates it a lot more.
Yeah. And that leads us to point number two is giving honest and sincere appreciation. If you do that up front when you're talking to people, they are automatically going to like you and want to listen to you. So you got to appreciate the people that you're talking to because everybody is worth appreciating. And it's no secret. That's the easiest way to deal with people is to appreciate them first.
Exactly. And these principles, I mean, the book is over 100 years old already. But these principles go back even further than that. And I was actually just reading an article in Inc. magazine where they were talking about a principle put forward by Ben Franklin. And what he was talking about was when dealing with haters, somebody who just can't stand you. What he was saying was show a genuine appreciation for something they're interested in. Ask them about it. When you're showing that appreciation, it becomes very difficult for them to hate you when you're sharing an interest. So these principles go back further than the book. Again, at least as far as Ben Franklin, and recent psychological studies have actually shown that these still are very valid.
Yeah, and bouncing to part two is 6 ways to make people like you. And this principle, as far as giving honest and sincere appreciation, a logical follow up to that is point number four under making people like you, and that's being a good listener, letting other people talk.
That's very true. When you leave an event, the person that walks out saying, "That was fantastic. I had some great conversations." 9 times out of 10, the person saying that has been talking about themselves and other people were listening and they gave him that opportunity.
And everybody loves to talk.
Yes.
So, again, this isn't rocket science. A lot of you
Right.
folks are out there saying, aha.
And bouncing back to the final principle in part one, it's arouse in the other person an eager want. You want to draw that person out. You want that person to want to be around you. And all of these principles all work together. When you appreciate that person, as in principle 2, and you can listen to that person, principle 4 in part 2, that person wants to be around you, and that's what you want to draw out.
Yeah, and the bottom line with this, there's a little caption next to this that says, "He who can do this has the whole world with him, and he who cannot walks a lonely way." And the bottom line is, people. We talk about networking and people, the art of the consumer. They only do things when they want to do them. And so, one of the best things you can possibly do is to arouse that in them. And obviously, starting with honest and sincere appreciation and listening helps you to get to that point.
And that's very important to remember, especially if you're in sales. And to be frank, we've talked about this in the point. All of us, to some extent, are in sales. That people don't buy on your schedule, they buy on their schedule. So you need to bring that out in them and say, "Oh, okay, yes." And so when it comes up, they have that want, they think of you.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into actually what we just talked about as far as being a good listener. But point one under 6 ways to make people like you is becoming genuinely interested in other people. When we talk about relationships, people want to have relationships. People want to hang around people that they know, like, and trust. And the bottom line is if you show interest in somebody else, they are going to like you immediately. And principle number two is the easiest one of the bunch, as far as I'm concerned. The easiest way to make a good first impression is just smile. Show yourself as being happy.
Right. And those go hand in hand. I mean, when you have a genuine interest in someone and they're talking, you tend to smile. And I know a lot of people will just fall back on Seinfeld going, "Oh, yes, genuine interest. I can fake that." Like, you can't fake genuine interest.
They'll see
You
right
act
through it.
Yeah, people see right through that. Uh, and it's I mean, it's a joke, that Seinfeld used in his show, but there are people out there that think they can fake being genuine, and it's simply not possible because it's an oxymoron. If you are being genuine, you can't fake it. That interest draws people to you because, again, you're giving them the opportunity to talk about something they want to talk about, and you're showing that you're actually interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're getting back to the listening point a lot, but point number
Yep.
three, you have to do point number four to do this properly. And it's remember to use the other person's first name. And people, there's nothing sweeter to a person than their first name, especially with somebody that they've just met. And that really is a great way to show genuine interest in somebody. So it's something that you really need to do. And I have a hard time doing it myself, but if you can go and figure out a way to remember people's first names and then use them every time you talk to them, it makes a world of difference. It really shows that you're being genuinely interested.
Yes, and most of us have a hard time remembering people's names, especially when you're meeting a lot of people. But when you first meet somebody, repeat their name back to them. Use it as often as possible when you're talking to them that first time. One, they like hearing their name, but two, it helps you remember it.
Absolutely. And really, point number five is a logical progression on this too. And it says talk in terms of the other person's interests. If you get them talking, obviously, if you ask them some questions, again, I'm talking about things that they're interested in. That's a fantastic thing that you can do for them. And it makes them feel just more comfortable, more important, and so on and so forth. And again, the title of this section of 6 tips is 6 ways to make people like you. So if you talk about their interests, they are most likely to like you. And if they don't, then they're probably not the right person to be talking to in the first place.
Right. And even though this section is, 6 tips, they're all of these tips are related. You can't do one without the other. So if you're showing a genuine interest and you're smiling and you're listening to them, then it becomes second nature to talk in terms of that person's interest because again, you're genuinely interested in it.
Yeah. And
All of these things work together and they build on each other.
yeah,
So
and they
it's not, a group of things that, oh, I have to remember all of these things. One leads right into the other seamlessly.
yeah, and number 6 is actually sincerely make the other people feel important, the other person feel important. And that's the culmination of these tips that we just talked about. And the bottom line is if you want somebody to like you instantly, make them feel important. And all these things do that.
Absolutely. And again, it's a natural progression. If you're showing genuine interest, if you're smiling when they talk, if you're actually listening to them, all of this works to make them feel important. And that's something that every one of us can do. The person in front of you should be the most important person to you at that moment. And when you show that to them, when they can feel that, yes, they really are important to you, they can't help but like you. They can't help but feel a connection. And that's what all of this is really about is building connections between people.
Yeah, and building on again, part one is the fundamental techniques in handling people, and part two are 6 ways to make people like you. The logical progression is part three, and this works in business, it works in family and friends, and so on and so forth. But this is how to win people to your way of thinking. And point number one is to get the best of an argument, avoid it. There's absolutely no winner to an argument. Even if somebody gets their way, both people walk away feeling bad.
That's very true. Think about social media today. When was the last time you had a political discussion on social media where you honestly converted somebody to your way of thinking? It doesn't happen. People are very set in their ways. And it's better to accept that and say, okay, you know what? We may disagree, but we have the right to disagree. And you have to respect the person having their opinion. You may never agree with that opinion, but respect the person's right to have it.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind when you are supposedly having an argument, I like to think of it as a discussion of disagreement, is point number one of the whole uh, fundamental techniques of handling people, which starts with criticizing, condemning, or complaining. Don't go in with that approach where you are preconceived as far as what you're thinking about, as far as what you're talking about. You have to go in with an open mind. And along those lines, number two says show respect for other people's opinions. Um, if you don't, that's a sure way of making enemies. and all these points. There's 12 of these points under winning people to your way of thinking. So respecting other people's opinions when wrong, admit it quickly and definitively. That's so important. A drop of honey means always beginning in a friendly way. So these first four, as you can see, these are building as far as how to win people over to your way of thinking.
Right.
And if you
And
put things into practice,
it's very important to show that respect. And as Principle 2 says, never say you're wrong. There are other ways to phrase that. You know, you can say to somebody, "Well, I'm not sure I see where you're coming from in that. Can you explain that further? I'm not sure that that's really correct. How did you come about this?" Give them the opportunity to explain their point of view, and don't say they're wrong, but along the way, if they have a mistaken fact, you can say, "Aha, now I understand where you got that impression," and you can give them that information. You're not telling them they're wrong, but you're giving them the information for them to go, "Oh, okay, I see." Again, people get their backs up into the wall. They do not want to admit they're wrong. If you're wrong, admit it.
yeah, again, it's human nature, that defense mechanism. Number five is a very, very interesting one, and it's something that you got to work on, but it's a fine art, and it's called the secret of Socrates. And this is keeping the other person saying yes. This is a great technique when you're making a sales call on somebody or whatever. If you are just asking them questions that make them say yes and agree, what you're trying to do is get them to talk themselves into liking it themselves without trying to sell them anything. So this is really a keen one to be working on. But if you can get people to keep people saying yes, it helps a long way in winning people over to your way of thinking.
Yes, people like being right. And if you can get them to say yes, they're in agreement already. They say, "Yes, okay, we're on the same page." It's long been said one of the easiest ways to stop an argument is to say, "You may be right about that." Even if you don't agree, by saying you may be right about that, they can't continue to argue because you've conceded the point.
Yeah.
They're like, so getting them to say yes repeatedly gets them in the habit of saying yes, gets them in the mindset of yes.
Yeah.
So that when you come to the point where you're putting your point of view across, or the sales question, or whatever it is that's the point of the conversation, when you've got that yes momentum, the natural progression is to keep that going.
Yeah, absolutely. And point number six, we've talked to in different ways. It's kind of restating things, but letting the other person do all the talking is very important. And there's point number five, as far as getting people to say yes. What you're really doing is point number seven, getting their cooperation by making other people feel that the idea is their own. The more that you can make them talk about it and start saying good things about it, they're going to say, yeah, this is a good idea. And so psychologically, that's a great one to work. And that goes hand in hand with point number five here, keeping the other people saying yes.
Right. And point number 7 is very important because people in general don't like to be told what to do. So if what you're suggesting, you give them, enough breadcrumbs to follow so that they come up with the idea themselves, they feel, "Oh, well, they're not being told what to do. They've discovered what to do. They've come up with it themselves." And they're much more likely to go along with it at that point because they feel invested in the process. They've put in the thought and they've come up with the fact that this is a good idea.
Yeah, and along those lines, one of the things that you have to do is point number eight, and that's trying to see things from the other person's view. And we've talked about this in ways to make people like you and listening to people, but it's really, really important to really listen and understand what's going on. And as you said, if you don't understand something, just say, look, I'm not getting this. Can you explain it to me again? And by doing that, it's really, really going to help out a lot.
Right, and that also keeps both of you on the same page, so you know where the other person stands.
Yeah, we talked about arousing in the person an eager want. Point number 9 here is being sympathetic with others' ideas and goals. And basically, what you need to do is you need to identify what their ideas and their desires are and listen to them. And by doing that, you are going after that eager want in part number 1.
Right. And the act of being sympathetic to their ideas and desires is crucial to building a connection. Because if you're just trying to push your ideas on them, they're going to push back. It's human nature. By being sympathetic and listening to their ideas, again, goes back to listening, you can make that connection. You can see where your ideas can fit together so that if your ideas and their ideas can work in tandem, you make each other stronger and you build that connection.
And we are talking about, again, how to win friends and influence people. People love to do good. And the next point, number 10, is appealing to people's nobler motives. Everybody wants to do something that's feels good to them. And that's what this one is all about. So influencing people, getting them to talk about those is a great way to go.
Right. And, you do have to appeal to what's best in a person. Nobody ever went wrong pumping somebody up, making them feel good about themselves, and making them feel that their ideas were not just good for them, but good for other people. So when you do that, you appeal to their nobler motives. You make them feel good about themselves. And again, that's part of what this is all about. You're making friends, you're influencing them by making them feel good about themselves, by showing them what good they can accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. The next one is kind of like, remember, this book was written back in the early 1900s or the mid 1900s. And the caption here says, the movies do it, TV does it, why don't you do it? And it says, dramatize your ideas. Now, there's a difference between being really dramatic and so on and so forth and doing things sincerely. So I would put in there that you have to do it with sincerity. But obviously, people like to see that you're passionate about what you're talking about in a sincere way.
All right. And I mean, dramatize, again, is language of the time. What you're doing is you're illustrating your point, you're showing rather than telling. And that's a key point when you're writing something. You want to show versus tell. To influence somebody, you want to show them the result rather than just tell them how it's going to happen. So that's what this principle is really about. It's about visualizing what it is, illustrating it, and really getting them to see what you're talking about and how they can help.
Yeah. And the last point here under part number 3, again, which is entitled How to Win People to Your Way of Thinking. This says, when nothing else works, try this. And it's throw down a challenge. Now, this is an interesting point, too. Give me some thoughts on this one.
This actually is a very valid point because so many people, when you tell them, oh, you can't do that, their first thought is, oh, I can't? Watch me. So that's what I think that's what this is. This is throwing down the challenge. Oh, you can't do that. There's no way that can be done. Really? You think I can't do that? Well, I'm going to show you.
That's right. And again, I mean, everybody's different, and these points aren't, you're not going to do all these points on everybody, but these are just tips. And basically, what we're going towards on the last part is leadership. And it says how to change people without giving offense or arousing resentment. A leader's job often includes changing your people's attitudes and behavior. And these points, these 9 points here, are ways to do that. And point number one, again, is so important. And this is always begin with praise and appreciation. It's like giving honest and sincere appreciation in the fundamental techniques, which is number one. But it's worth repeating here.
All right. It goes back to the old saying, you get more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. People like to hear praise. They like to think of themselves in a positive manner. If you can help them do that, they'll listen to you more.
And point number two follows very, very logically. This is how to criticize and not be hated for it. A lot of people out there complain about their bosses because all they're doing is picking out stuff that's wrong and saying you got to do this and you got to do that. This point is be indirect when pointing out mistakes. Point number three helps with this. Always talk about your own mistakes first. If you can make an example of yourself, it really makes people feel a whole lot more comfortable, and you're not the almighty boss. You're a human being like they are. So talking about your own mistakes and being indirect when pointing out mistakes to people is very, very important.
Right. And it also goes back to the earlier principle about sympathizing with someone else's point of view. You have to understand why they made that mistake. Were they missing some important information? Were they missing the proper tools? There can be reasons. There's a Japanese proverb, fix the problem, not the blame. And that's important. It when you blame somebody, nobody takes it well. But when you're just saying, "Oh, well, there was a mistake. Let's see what we can do to make sure that doesn't happen again." It's much it's received much better that way.
Yeah. And very logically, one of the techniques to do this is number four, and this is ask questions rather than giving orders. If you're facing a situation, start asking questions about this instead of saying, you messed up, you got to change this. So it's really, really important. Again, it ties into the other techniques as far as getting the people to talk themselves rather than talking themselves into it and saying yes, and all those principles that we talked about earlier. But asking questions rather than charging in is a really, really important way, again, to inoffensively change people.
Right. And of course, the reasoning for all of these different things about not blaming people and giving them a chance to fix it and explain what happened and being indirect is actually principle number 5, let the other person save face. You're not there to put somebody down. If you can give them a graceful way out, do so.
Yeah, and as we're talking about before, if you talk about your own mistakes first, this is one way of doing that also. The next principle, number six, is and number seven also. Number six is lavishly praise every improvement, and number seven is give the person a reputation to live up to. A great way to save face with let other people save face is to acknowledge what they've done in the past, and so talk about the great things that they've done in the past and tell them, not to tell them, you influence them to think about living up to that reputation that they've already earned.
Right. And studies have actually shown when you expect good things from people, people will deliver good things. If you expect bad things from people, they will deliver bad things. So you want to expect the best out of people. And generally, they won't let you down.
Absolutely. Um, a great thing to do, obviously, is point number eight, encourage people frequently. We talked about lavishly praising improvements, but using encouragement, even, everything is not going to go smoothly all the time. And you may need to use this more and more and more. But if you're talking about the reputation and the great things they've done, you encourage them to continue to do that. And you know that they're going to get past this.
Right. And by using the encouragement, it reinforces their self-image, which is very important because you want to build people up rather than tearing them down. That because that's the type of person that attracts other people.
Yeah, and the last one here is making people glad to do what you want. And it says make the person happy about what to do. And all of these lead up to that, where it's their idea and they know they can do it and they want to keep their reputation up. And so making the other person happy about what to do. That's the last point here.
That's it. And what we've just done is, in a nutshell, how to win friends and influence people. And it is an amazing book. And, there aren't that many books that stand the test of time the way this one has. I mean, over 100 years later, the principles are still valid. So
And
it's
we all know
definitely,
people out there that basically this is the way that they work. They are what we just talked about, and it takes practice to train yourself to respond accordingly using these tips. And but once you do, people will be gravitating to you, and you're going to feel a whole lot better about what's going on. You're going to be very, very valuable. So it's so important to just take a look at this. And again, these points are printable, and I would do that and just take a look at these things and understand that these are things that you can do. It's your choice, and it
so
really, really helps a lot.
we're coming up on the end of our time. So, yeah, in a nutshell, what do you think is the big takeaway for people from this book?
Well, I guess what we're talking about is this is an example as to how you can handle friends and handle people and handle the workplace. Albert Schweitzer once said, example is not a thing in influencing people, it is the only thing. And people will see whether you're genuine or not. But by doing this, you are setting an example as to how to win friends and influence people. So put it into practice.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is that all of the methods in dealing with people that this book puts forward is about building them up and being positive about what they can do. And we live in a world where there's so much negativity, and human nature is, oh, well, you did this wrong. When you practice this and you actually build people up, it doesn't just build them up, it builds yourself up as well, and it helps everybody succeed. So I think that for me is the big takeaway from this book. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can also find us at the Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. See you then.